Vietnam. A country name that for some might bring to mind thoughts of anything from communism to traffic-filled streets or delicious food. A country filled to the brim with rich cultural traditions and heritage, some of which is still celebrated today. But what about the language of this long country that cradles the eastern coast of former Indochina, nowadays better known as Southeast Asia? A language that looks familiar to the untrained eye, but still leaves a lot to be learned. We kicked off this episode back in Cusco, Peru, where we spoke via Skype with Gaston Doren, who was about to visit the country after spending some time learning Vietnamese.
As you're saying, my name is Gaston Doren. I'm a Dutch writer, particularly on linguistics. I call myself a language writer on social media. And I'm going to travel to Vietnam the day after tomorrow.
So I just wanted to know, first of all, what was the inspiration to learn Vietnamese?
I am writing a book about 20 major world languages, a range from small to big. I mean, even the smallest one is quite big. And that is Vietnamese, which has about 85 or 90 million speakers. And I thought it would be a nice introduction to the book, a nice way of leading the reader into the book, if in the first chapter I am as ignorant as the rest of us and just embark on a language that I have very little idea about and which I do not speak at all.
How different has it been then studying Vietnamese to languages that you'd previously studied?
Oh, very different. Vietnamese is more like Chinese, which I do not speak, except that it has an easier writing system because they use our Roman alphabet. And strangely, Vietnamese is somewhat like sign language. Of course, it's different in that it's oral. I mean, you speak it with your mouth and you listen to it with your ears. But its grammar is more like sign language. And I remember back when I was learning sign language, people said, yeah, sign language is a bit like Chinese because the grammar is similar. Mm-hmm. And that's actually true.
Interesting. So that would be one of the easier aspects of the language then, you think, the grammar?
Good thing about Vietnamese grammar is that you don't have to conjugate and what's the verb? Decline, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to conjugate the verbs and you don't have all these case endings like in Russian or in, I think, Arabic, I'm not quite sure, and German. There are a couple of very, let's say, unfortunate things about Vietnamese. And one is that they do not have well-defined words. The language has syllables which have a meaning, and there are certain habits of putting syllables together with a certain extended meaning, you might say. And you might call these words, but that is not how traditionally they have thought about them. So if you look at a Vietnamese dictionary, you will often not find certain words because to the native-speaking mind, these are just combinations of syllables with a meaning. I'll give you one example that's simpler. There's this word học, which means study or learn. But you can also combine that with all sorts of additional syllables, which turns it into student or school or university or practice. But it's not well defined as we would like.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you're a native speaker, this is all crystal clear. I mean, I'm not trying to say anything negative about Vietnamese at all. But it's very hard to come to grips with, to get a handle on for an English speaker.
What are you most looking forward to being able to do with the language?
Be able, I hope, in the course of those 3 weeks, to ever better read what I see around me. Mm. I mean, I will take lessons. I will have Vietnamese classes with a teacher there. I'm in the process of organizing that every day, I hope, every morning. Yeah. And I hope that I will talk to people somewhat, perhaps order things in a shop or in a cha da.
So what resources have you found particularly useful so far for learning Vietnamese?
I found the Asimil book fairly useful, but it doesn't exist in English, only in German and French. I have found the Teach Yourself Vietnamese book perhaps even better. I like working with that. Then contacting a teacher in my case, through Italki, but I think there are other platforms as well, has been an excellent move. I really like my teacher. She's a motivating force in my studying Vietnamese. And for flashcards, well, there are all sorts of systems out there for flashcards. I think I've been using Study Blue, which is pretty good, I think.
Well, I'm really looking forward to speaking to you again after your trip and seeing how it went and how your language has improved. Soon it was our turn to visit Vietnam. And after a little fun, because who doesn't want to be covered in coloured powder and foam that's impossible to wash off, we hit the streets. Fueled by some very sweet and very large sugary drinks, we chatted with Tree from Language Accepted, who helped to explain some more about the language. Just from the streets, ga, chicken.
Ga, yeah. But because ga, if you say like GA, right, that is pronounced as ga. That is not like a good sound. Ga. Well, my parents are Vietnamese, but I was born in Switzerland. Yeah, so growing up in Switzerland, I haven't really had a lot of contact with Vietnamese people or Vietnamese friends in general up until university. That's when I gradually got to know a few Vietnamese people or friends, and in time there was this identity crisis that I had, and so I always wanted to come to Vietnam, but it wasn't until like I was 27. So then I decided to actually move to Vietnam, Saigon, for a longer period of time. So yeah, this time I'm here for at least 1 year, I hope.
Okay, so in terms of that then, in terms of language,
yeah,
how do you think being here has impacted that for you?
Well, the most obvious reason is you're in the country where the language is spoken, obviously. So you can study yourself with books and all that, but in the end it's not very effective, or not very fun, I'd say too. I've learned so many words from books, and then I'm coming here, I realize it's not very used. Like, well, it's not so, or it's more in the northern parts. Like, it's like a huge difference between northern dialects and southern dialects. It's easier to learn the standardized, like the standard northern dialect, because that's exactly how it's written. Like Vietnamese, how Vietnamese is written in books. So if you read it exactly how it's written, then you're good to go. Like that's the standard. Yeah.
Is that because? Am I right in thinking previously it was written with Chinese characters?
Yes. That's a long time ago. We did use the Chinese characters, but then with the French colonial rule thingy, the writing system got Romanized.
Okay,
yeah. So that's actually a fun thing because I got asked twice about whether or not it's difficult to learn the Vietnamese characters. I was like, Vietnamese characters? Well, we use the Latin alphabet, so.
In fact, Vietnamese did used to be written in Chinese characters. A Romanized version was created by Jesuits in the 17th century, but it wasn't until the French took control of the region in the late 1800s that this version became more prominent. In 1910, the French ordered that all official documents be written in the newer Romanized version of the written language, not the Chinese-based Chu Nom, which I'm definitely saying with a terrible accent. So not only did the French leave baguettes ready for banh mi, but also their alphabet.
Put it that way.
So that was the French.
Yeah, exactly.
Were the French also responsible for the very high quantity of accents and diacritics?
Exactly.
Was that French as well?
Exactly.
Oh, merci.
Like also, with the tones, you see the accent aigu, accent grave, and the circonflexe. What's
and then just like 7 of them on one letter.
Yeah.
Because why not?
Exactly. Yeah. That's. I'd say most of the sounds you know them already. So it's just a matter of just learning how to pronounce it. The tones are more difficult, obviously, especially for foreigners who haven't learned any tonal languages before.
Yeah. I was curious about Vietnamese, and Gaston had said it wasn't like learning any old European language. Vietnamese was different. The tones in particular were a lot to take in. So, further north in the capital of Hanoi, we met with Sapphire and Schneggy from Vietnamese Teaching Group, who just so happened to have taught Gaston during his time here a few weeks before us.
And high rising tone, low falling tone, low broken is the hard one. Low rising and high broken. This one is hard as well.
Okay, this one then starts low. Okay, so ma.
Ma. It's like low, but then it's long, take longer. So.
Okay, rises sharply, gradually falls with it. Okay.
Yeah, the tongue is fallen.
Tongue is
fallen down.
Okay.
Gradually. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Ma.
Ma.
Yeah, ma.
Ma.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my favourite.
Nah.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. What else do people find difficult when they learn Vietnamese?
I think vocabulary. I mean, because even they see the word and they can say it, but if they don't have a Vietnamese being with them, they can't know the meaning. And, but yeah, the tongue is still most difficult. Yeah. And also, like Vietnamese people often speak kind of poetic. You know what I mean? And sometimes, like if you speak with Vietnamese people, they can just say something, but it's not exactly what they mean.
Alright then, so that's difficult. What about the easy stuff? What is kind of easier about learning Vietnamese?
I think it's very fun because you see when you try to read a word, you have to move so much. Yeah, so it's quite fun when you see a word and you guess it and oh yeah, I got it. It's really interesting feeling. It's
Really
feel rewarding.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like because the way it pronounced exactly the same the way it's written. So as soon as you know the alphabet and you know like how the tones work, it's easier to just get and say the word whatever you see in Vietnamese. You don't need to know like the meanings. You just say it because you know how it works, like the tones.
Right, so the tones, alphabet pronunciation, once you've got that, it's phonetic. You can read.
The grammar is so easy.
The grammar as well.
You know, because like it's different from English. You have like more than 6 tenses. But in Vietnam, we have like if it's the past, you can just add a word đã before the verb. That's it. Đã. It's easier. And is that present continuous. You add đang, and is in the future.
What reasons would you give someone to learn Vietnamese? Why should someone learn Vietnamese?
So I think it's like first, Vietnamese is so easy since you know all the rules, and the tones and the alphabet. You can just completely nail it. If you learn Vietnamese, you understand the language, you can understand more about the culture, the people, you will love here more, and maybe you will find more things, not only language, the food. Yeah, food's amazing. Relationship, yeah.
Multiple cafes later, it was time to catch up with Gaston again after his trip and find out about his time learning Vietnamese in Vietnam.
How was your trip?
It was great. I had a really good time. I spent 3 weeks nearly only in Hanoi, and I really liked the atmosphere.
Cool. And how about language, on the language front? How did it go?
Well, on the one hand, it was great to hear and see Vietnamese all around me all the time. And it was also good to have a teacher that I saw nearly every day of the week.
Wow.
But at the same time, it was a bit disappointing as well because I didn't advance as much as I had hoped before, especially in speaking. I think I've learned quite a bit of new vocabulary, and what I knew already has now taken root more firmly. Conversation in Vietnamese is really largely still beyond me, frankly.
Yeah. Why do you think it was disappointing? Is it that you feel that compared to learning other languages, your expectations were higher based on that? Maybe
my expectations were unrealistic, but I remember the first time I went to Spain when I was a student. I had already studied some Spanish, so I was not an entire newbie. I had, used these tapes as we used them back in those days. But when I spoke to Spaniards, at first I had enormous trouble understanding them. But after a few weeks, that got a lot better. And I expected that sort of to happen in Vietnam as well, except that the people I spoke to, nearly all of them had good English. And Vietnamese is just so much more difficult to understand. I'm not good at understanding languages. I'm not good at, identifying things people say.
Yeah.
But Vietnamese was way harder than any European language I've tried so far.
Interesting. Going out for dinner last night, and like you say, English is sometimes pretty good. And we went to this place, and I'm looking, and I've got my little phrase book, checking the words on the menu, thinking, I'm vegetarian, so I'm like, that's got meat in it. Oh, that means beef, so that's meat. And then the girl came forward and was like, hello, can I help you? And I was like, Oh, okay. One of the things, because I've had a little preview, and one of the things that you mentioned was that, you thought, okay, which one of these languages should I look at a little bit more in depth for this book? And Vietnamese, you picked one reason, because of the alphabet. Do you think in hindsight, was that a good decision, or would you have perhaps considered, knowing what you know now about Vietnamese, would you have considered another language with a different script?
Personally, this was the best choice. However, if you are a person who really likes to learn a language through hearing it and speaking it without paying much attention to the page, to the written language, perhaps then in that case, choosing a language with a different script, or even Chinese, which have a very, very different Mandarin. I mean, if you're a person like that, those languages may be preferable. But to me, they're another nightmare. I mean, I really want to be able to read what I've just tried to say or what I've heard, and I want to see language in the street.
Yeah.
So, it makes it so much easier. It's still hard, but it makes it so much easier.
Do you feel, have your thoughts on that, on what's difficult and what's easy, quote unquote, in the language, have they stayed the same, or has that changed after your time in Vietnam?
Yeah, for one thing, it very often occurred that I was speaking to my Hanoi teacher, called Luan, and I would, piece together a sentence, and she would look hesitant and say, well, yes, people would understand that. It's technically correct, but we just wouldn't put it that way. And that's, things like, I would say something like, I don't know where to go, which is a simple sentence, right?
Yeah.
Or something like, I don't know where I shall go, where I will go, which is another way of putting it, the same thing. But in Vietnamese, you would rather say something like, I don't know the place where to go, or something like that. I don't know the place to go, that's it. I don't know the place to go. So you use a noun like place, or I don't know the manner of doing that, instead of I don't know how to do that. It makes perfect sense. It doesn't even sound all that strange, but it's just not what comes to us, English speakers, Dutch speakers, I think European language speakers, naturally.
And a lot of the time, I think you're right, it is just difficult for us because it's different. The difference is what makes it difficult so much at the time.
The gap is so much wider between, I think, all of the European languages, not that I know all of them, but the ones that I'm somewhat familiar with, they are, well, as some Chinese person apparently said at some point, they're almost like dialects of each other when you compare them to, well, in his case, Mandarin, but also Vietnamese. You really come to appreciate how similar Spanish is to English once you're trying to learn Vietnamese.
Do you have plans then to continue learning Vietnamese? Do you have plans to go back to the country?
Yes, on both counts. I really enjoy, the challenge of Vietnamese. I mean, it's not all that useful, frankly, but it's such a tremendous challenge for a linguophile, like myself and like yourself. And as I said, the atmosphere is so pleasant that I really look forward to meeting, some Vietnamese people in particular and the Vietnamese people in general once more.
Of course, you'll be going back with your enhanced language skills.
Gaston's experiences may have shaped his new book, Babel, but they'd also inspired me, along with meeting Tree and Sapphire and Schneggy. And despite all of the trickier elements of Vietnamese, from an English speaker's perspective at least, after having visited the country and spoken with everyone for this episode, I definitely want to come back at some point in the future, hopefully with some enhanced language skills of my own. If you'd like to read more about Gaston's experience with Vietnamese, as well as 19 more of the world's widest spoken languages, then his new book, Babel, is a must-read. Click on the link in the description below to learn more and get a copy now.